your book, and it was published in September 2025, if I'm not mistaken. It's about, let me bring it up to our audience. The book is about Israel in Palestine and Jewish rejection of Zionism. And I think you can buy it online, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yes, yes.
yeah, it's available on Amazon and all these, websites that i- the issue, I think, when we talk about Judaism and Zionism, many of us don't know what is the difference between the two terms. And when it comes to the basics, to the main difference between the two, what could you bring to the table that may help us to understand the two sort of ideology movement? Jewish movement is a religion, is an ancient religion, but Zionism, to my understanding, is something new. But you're taking that.
Well, you're absolutely right. Judaism is a religion, a confession that has been around for thousands of years. Uh, and it's a universal in the sense that anyone can convert and become Jew if one wants to follow Judaism. Um, Zionism is a political movement based on the idea of gathering Jews in Palestine. And the idea originated among English speaking Christians, Protestants, in the 17th century. And it attracted very important people, including Isaac Newton. The Zionist idea was developing among Protestants, English speaking Protestants, till about the end of the 19th century, when Jews, some Jews to be more exact, those who were very much estranged from Judaism, who knew very little about it, they accepted this idea and had the first Zionist Congress, the first political Congress of Zionism, in 1897. So it's about 130 years ago. It's quite telling that the first Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland, which doesn't have a big Jewish community and definitely didn't have a big one then. The reason was that originally the Zionists wanted to have their Congress in Munich, which had a big Jewish community. But German Jews addressed the German government with a request to forbid the holding of the Zionist Congress. They were so much against it that the Congress had to be moved to Switzerland. And we can talk later about why Jews objected and rejected Zionism.
It seems, yeah. When you look at Israel today, and because whatever they say in Netanyahu and his administration, it's all about whoever is in favor of Judaism, in favor of a state called Israel that is the state of Jewish people. Can we wrap up all the Jewish people in Israel and the way that, because the way they're describing that, if you are not thinking the way that the government in Israel think, that you're against Jews. It doesn't matter you are Christian, Jew, and whatever. We have Christian Jew Zionists. I would say they're mostly supporting this sort of idea. What is the agenda? Why do they need to push these people in the Middle East in that direction? Because
Well,
after all, I don't see what's going on with Israel would help Israel in a long run.
well, you're absolutely right. There are tens of millions of Christian Zionists, and there are about 14 million Jews altogether, including babies and old people. So the idea of gathering Jews in Palestine, in the state of Israel today, is largely promoted by Christian Zionists. Now, why is it important for Christian Zionists in particular? Because as in the 17th century, just as today, they believe that by gathering Jews in the Holy Land, they're going to speed the second coming of Jesus Christ, the second coming of Messiah. And this motivates them to defend the state of Israel, right or wrong. And a good example of that is the American ambassador in Israel, who is a Baptist pastor and who considers that he is an emissary of God, not an emissary of President Trump only. And they take it very seriously. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think that not only him, want to say that if you're a real Jew, you have to support Israel. And this is shared by many people, including President Trump. President Trump, in one of meetings with Jews, actually said that, you have to be good Jews, you have to support Israel. For him, it's what Jews are about. He is not a Christian Zionist. I mean, he is barely Christian, but what matters is that this idea has tremendous support among Christian Zionists, but as we speak now, there is some disappointment, and some prominent conservative Christian Zionists are leaving the fold and become critics of Israel. So that support is becoming more fragile than before.
Looking at the history, in your opinion, does the historical record show that Zionist leaders anticipated or even planned the displacement of Palestinians from the start?
I think the idea of displacing the Palestinians is an old one. It can be traced back to the formula, which was utterly incorrect, but very popular. A land without people for people without land. Well, land without people, it means precisely that. And we could see that the British, who supported the Zionist idea in 1917 and 1920s, wrote very openly that we are not concerned about the opinions of a few 100,000 Arabs who happen to live there. The expression was happen to live there, as if they really don't belong, and the land should belong to the Jews. And that's a very Christian Zionist attitude, which incidentally, Prime Minister Netanyahu mobilized very successfully. When he was Israeli representative at the United Nations, he spent a lot of time in southern United States, precisely with Christian Zionists, trying to build up support for Israel, and he was largely successful.
I think comparing the two, Zionism and Judaism, what is the reality when it comes to the relationship between the two, and what's the myth in today's world that we may not be aware of that?
Well, one, as I said, one is religion. The other one is a political movement. So when the Israeli government and Zionist circles accuse those who criticize Israel of anti-Semitism, it's utterly incorrect, because anti-Semitism is about rejecting Jews as Jews, just because they're Jews, whereas opposition to Zionism is political opposition to a certain idea. And the two have to be distinguished. I live in Montreal, where the idea of political independence of Quebec is very much debated, and we had two referenda on the subject. And there are Quebecers who reject independence, and there are those who approve of it and vote for it. But both of them remain Quebecers. It's not an issue of being against Quebecers. It's a political choice, as we all have. And I think that by confusing Judaism with Zionism, the Israeli government tries to stifle criticism, particularly criticism of the last 2 years when Israel was engaged in an unprecedented way in violence in Gaza.
You mentioned the last, since October the 7th, nobody can argue that what has happened in Gaza and in any sense, in any aspect, has helped Israel and the position of even Netanyahu and his administration. But even in the United States, you see the changes that are happening. The people are talking about what is the meaning of this sort of relationship between the United States and Israel. And do you think that in today's Israel, and the way that you see the polls coming out supporting Netanyahu and his administration, how this sort of support comes to the administration, and how did they manage that? Because you have to have a great campaign of to convince the people what you're doing is right for your future. How did they manage that? How they did convince the people who are living in Israel? They know many of them, went out of Israel during the conflict between Iran and Israel, between the situation in Gaza, and many secular Jews, they went to Cyprus. But after all, you see those people who remained in Israel, they were still supporting Netanyahu. How did it happen? How they can manage that to get this support from the people in Israel?
Well, I think that the majority of Israelis supported the army in its activities in Gaza. The protests that took place were really about freeing the hostages, or freeing the prisoners, to be more exact. Why did Israelis, and why do Israelis support this kind of military campaign against civilian population, essentially? Well, it has to do with the education they received. And there's a very powerful message in that education, which taps into Jewish history. When the Hamas attack occurred in October 23, it was called an unprovoked pogrom. Now, pogrom is a violent attack on Jews for no reason except that they're Jews. For a nuclear power and to say that they're innocent Jews and that was unprovoked is preposterous. But many people in Israel actually felt that we didn't do anything wrong, and all of a sudden they attack us. They forget about decades of oppression of the Palestinians, of expulsion of the Palestinians, many of whom ended up in Gaza, because many people in Gaza had been expelled, or their parents had been expelled from what is today Israel. And in fact, early Zionist leaders knew that and even articulated this. Moshe Dayan, a very important general in the history of Israel, said at a funeral of a soldier killed near Gaza, precisely in those areas that were attacked in 2023, he said, we have to understand these people who sit in Gaza and watch how we occupy their homes and we till their land. We have to understand that these people are very angry. He didn't justify it, he explained it. This kind of explanation was absent in 2023, and Netanyahu and his government really whipped up the campaign of innocent attacked by evil people. And there were, of course, a lot of lies about babies being burnt in microwaves and so on, and mass rape. It has all been debunked. But you asked me why they supported, because they really believed that they had not done anything wrong. And all of a sudden, this attack. So it's a very powerful feeling. In Israel, there's a lot of denial of the harm done to the Palestinians.